All right, guys, so we've been sounding the alarm over and over, and we've seen some good interviews on this where experts on fascism are coming out and saying, yeah, this is the thing. This is it. This is real. And in fact, it's gotten so bad that there were 2 or 3 different leading scholars on fascism who were like, I'm outie, dog. Like, I'm leaving this country. One of them went to Canada. We covered an interview on one of them the other day. But look at this. So now we have this from NPR. Hundreds of scholars say the U.S. is swiftly heading toward authoritarianism. A survey of more than 500 political scientists finds that the vast majority think the United States is moving swiftly from liberal democracy towards some form of authoritarianism. In the benchmark survey known as Bright Line Watch, U.S.-based professors rate the performance of American democracy on a scale from 0, complete dictatorship, to 100, perfect democracy. After President Trump's election in November, scholars gave American democracy a rating of 67. Several weeks into Trump's second term, the figure plummeted to 55%. It just says several weeks. Now, I don't know. I still think that's before Kilmar Abrego Garcia and directly shipping people to El Salvador with no due process whatsoever, 75% to 90% of them having not even a criminal record. So maybe it's time to ask him again and see how low that number gets now. That's a precipitous drop, said John Carey, a professor of government at Dartmouth and co-director of Bright Line Watch. There's certainly consensus. We're moving in the wrong direction. Carey said the decline between November and February was the biggest since Bright Line Watch began surveying scholars on threats to American democracy in 2017. In the survey, respondents consider 30 indicators of democratic performance, including whether the government interferes with the press, oh boy, punishes political opponents, and whether the legislature and the judiciary can check executive authority. Not all political scientists view Trump with alarm, but many like Carey, who focus on democracy and authoritarianism, are deeply troubled by Trump's attempts to expand executive power over his first several months in office. Quote, "We've slid into some form of authoritarianism," says Stephen Levitsky, a professor of government at Harvard and co-author of How Democracy Dies. "It is relatively mild compared to some others. It is certainly reversible, but we are no longer living in a liberal here's an expert saying straight up, quote, "We are no longer living in a liberal democracy." Look, man, it's important to point out, it's not like prior to Trump, everything was hunky-dory, everything was good, everything was acceptable, we were a perfect democracy. That's just not true. From the mid-1970s and onward, we have become basically an oligarchy, right? Democracy in name, oligarchy in practice, where big business and billionaires basically fund the political campaigns of politicians. They get in there and they represent those interests over the interests of the American people. That's always been the case. Now, having said that, it still also was the case. We truly and sincerely had separation of powers. We had checks and balances. We have due process. There were certain basic liberal values, a belief more in freedom of speech. There were definitely examples where we didn't abide by that, whether it be Edward Snowden, for example, who I think is a hero, or Julian Assange, who I think is a hero. But broadly speaking, domestically in the United States, we were on the spectrum of, are we very pro-free speech or are we super locked down? We were leaning way more in the free speech direction, right? So what Trump is doing is coming in like a wrecking ball and taking away these basic liberal Enlightenment values, these Magna Carta values that we all take for granted. That's gone. So now it's an oligarchy, except it's injected with steroids and human growth hormone. You're seeing a robber baron coup with Elon Musk. It's that mixed with straight up fascist policies. No hearing, no due process. We're going to kidnap you in the middle of the night and human traffic you to El Salvador. That's what we're witnessing. So to say it has escalated is a massive understatement, right? A massive understatement. It is getting orders of magnitude worse under Trump than what it was beforehand. All right, let me give you some more. When scholars use the term authoritarianism, they aren't talking about a system like China's, a one-party state with no meaningful elections. Instead, they're referring to something called competitive authoritarianism, the kind scholars say they see in countries such as Hungary and Turkey. In a competitive authoritarian system, a leader comes to power democratically and then erodes the system of checks and balances. Typically, the executive fills the civil service and key appointments, including prosecutor's office and judiciary, with loyalists. He or she then attacks the media, universities, and non-governmental organizations to blunt public criticism and tilt the electoral playing field in the ruling party's favor. If that sounds familiar, it's because that is literally exactly what's happening right now. The government would still have elections and would nominally be democratic, says Rory Truex, a political scientist of Princeton who focuses on China. But those elections would no longer be free and fair. Well, we're already at that point in many respects. Go watch the interview Crystal and I did with investigative journalist Greg Palast, and he goes through all of the official government numbers that we know are the case. That show, between the ballot purging and the ballot spoiling and the Jim Crow rules that were in place in the last election, over 3.5 million votes for Kamala were thrown out. And that was the last election. This is before Trump got another grip on power. And now that he's in power, he's signing executive orders to turn our elections over to Elon Musk and let him oversee them. They're also trying to take these Jim Crow rules, which purge people from the voter rolls, and they're trying to expand them to all 50 states. So this is the concern. In all seriousness, we really have to talk about for elections for the rest of our lives. We really need to be too big to rig. That's the thing that they said. The Trump people said after 2020, right? Like, we need to make it too big to rig on our side. But for real, we definitely need that on the Democratic side. That it needs to be such an overwhelming rebuke with such colossal numbers, a tsunami of voters, that there's nothing they could do to try to tweak around the edges like they did last time in order to get the outcome they want. While the vast majority of scholars surveyed say Trump is pushing the country toward autocracy, other professors strongly disagree. Oh boy, let's see how this goes. James Campbell, a retired political scientist at the University at Buffalo, SUNY, says Trump is using legitimate presidential powers to address long-standing problems. Oh my God. By the way, this is how you get otherwise intelligent people to rationalize what's happening. This is a very straightforward case of death by 1,000 cuts. So you take away a check and balance here, you take away a little bit of oversight there, you purge any dissenting voices, take away the independence of certain government agencies here and there, one after the other, and then all these things, from the macro view, you look at it and you go, oh, I see the plan, I see what they're doing. But a lot of people get too bogged down in the weeds, and they just, oh, well, that thing was acceptable, and this was borderline but acceptable, and this was borderline but acceptable, and they don't see the big picture. And that's the problem with this guy, right? Is there such a thing as having a strong executive which still abides by democratic rules? Of course. Look at FDR, right? Like, you can use the power of the executive for good. You can have an expansive view of the power of the executive and use it for good. But very clearly what he's doing is using that for bad, but also just flat out ignoring any of the checks that still remain, like clearly violating court orders. Campbell points to Trump's use of tariffs to try to push companies to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States. Okay, but that's not what's actually going to happen. And that's bullshit that you take his word. We're going to bring back the jobs. Meanwhile, factories are fleeing because of the tariffs. And he's not doing industrial policy. He's doing austerity, which means we're going to lose even more jobs. And also, there's going to be a big legal battle as to whether these tariffs are legal. And I think he may lose that. Because this power he's asserting has never been used for tariffs specifically. Anyway, let's continue. In recent decades, economic globalization led to catastrophic layoffs of everyone from furniture makers in North Carolina to auto assembly line workers in the Midwest as firms send work overseas, especially to China. I think they've done an excellent job, Campbell says, of the Trump administration. Oh my God. Who is this guy? Campbell adds that he thinks many political scientists may see Trump as autocratic because they don't like him or his politics. I think most of them are coming from the political left, he says. There's a comfort in all of them getting together and saying, oh, Trump's a bad guy. He's authoritarian. Oh, my God. Now, if you're sitting there and wondering, hey, why is it that, 80-90% of academia lean left? This is why. This is why. The people who lean left are more correct. They're more into information and facts and education and having a well-researched view of the world. That's why education skews left, is because the right-wingers are not as fucking bright. All right? Let's call it what it is. Like, Trump was literally trying to get affirmative action for MAGA in his fight with Harvard or Columbia or one or the other. Like, he had a list of demands. One of them was, affirmative action for MAGA. It's like, no, there is a real clear reason why you don't have many right-wing or far right-wing professors. They're not curious. They're not intellectual. They don't know the information, right? So anyway, that guy's a bit of a joke, but you get the point here. Hundreds of scholars are saying the correct thing, the accurate thing, that we're already at. I mean, look, at this point, if you're denying it, I think you're lying to yourself. You're either super ignorant and don't know anything, or you know it and you're kind of lying to yourself. Because there is no world where you can look at a guy kidnapping people, human trafficking them to El Salvador with no hearing and no due process, saying we made a mistake and then refusing to return the guy. There is no, innocent explanation for that. They are doing something extrajudicial. So it's not even really a prison they're sending them to. It's a concentration camp because it's outside the law. And we know, like I said, 75 to 90% of them have not even a criminal record. And so anybody who's supporting that, I'm sorry, but you're just a fascist. You're just a fascist. It really is that simple. I wish I could find a way to soften the blow or come up with a term that's accurate but kinder to you, but there is no way around it. And so that's why the hundreds of experts are sounding the alarm, because they're right. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.